Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs, et bienvenue au Conseil municipal pour la ville d'Ottawa pour le 31 août.
And this is the 31st of August meeting 2022.
31st of August, 2022. Hard to believe that it's September tomorrow. Call to order and moment of reflection. For those who are able to, please rise for a moment of personal reflection. Merci. I'm pleased to welcome Denise Herbert for the Mayor's City Builder Award, and I invite Osgood Councillor George DeRoos to join us for the presentation along with Denise. And welcome, Denise. And welcome to have some family and friends with you as well. Here comes George. How many years have you been married? 47. 47 years of marriage. Congratulations. This award, Denise, recognizes individuals or organizations that have demonstrated an extraordinary commitment to making our city a better place through volunteerism or exemplary action. Ce prix vise à récompenser les personnes et les organismes.
We want to recognize the people, organization that try to make from our city the best, a nice place to live.
Has volunteered at the Osgood Emergency Food Cupboard for over 25 years. She is widely considered in the community as the glue that holds the food cupboard together in the basement of St. John the Evangelist Catholic Church. Denise opens the food cupboard each Saturday from 10 a.m. to noon to provide healthy food for her less fortunate neighbors. The food has to come from somewhere, and Denise works closely with the Greeley Lions Club and area schools to run food drives to maintain a food supply. I'm told that Denise will sometimes use her own money during quieter months to ensure a supply of staple goods. Food shortage is often the case at this time of year. Schools are closed for the summer, which means students aren't holding any drives and the food cupboard isn't as full as it needs to be. But Denise will stock up on items like cereal and peanut butter to make sure no one goes hungry. Denise provides the Lions with details on the family size to ensure enough food is provided. And the Lions Club mentioned that this is their favorite annual event. They find it very rewarding and are very thankful for Denise's efforts in organizing it. For her exceptional volunteerism and her important contributions to the community, it's my pleasure on behalf of my colleague and your councillor, George DeRoos, to present the Mayor's City Builder Award to Denise. Congratulations and thank you. Come on up here, we'll just get a picture.
Yeah, I just want to thank George DeRoos and the mayor for the honor. That's a really great honor. I'd also take the opportunity to thank my husband. He's been helping me for the last 27 years at the food bank, especially carrying the heavy grocery down the church basement. He keeps telling me it's too heavy for you. So thank you very much.
I now have the pleasure of presenting the Mayor's City Builder Award to the Association des Auxiliaires de Centre d'accueil Champlain. Je suis heureux d'inviter Madame Joanne.
I would like to invite Madame Joanne Berkshire from the Center, as well as Mathieu Fleury. Do we have Mathieu Fleury in the room? I'm online, I'm sorry. Hello. Created in 1969 to help organize the opening of this center, the association from the Centre d'accueil Champlain is now part of the Champlain community.
It became a fundraising wing for the centre, organized recreational programs for residents, and created a friendship club to reduce resident loneliness. L'Association des auxiliaires du centre d'accueil
The
Champlain
association became a fundraising wing of the center, and they're there to help the residents around.
family and friends to ensure the well-being and best quality service and comfort for residents. Les membres de l'association le font par le
The members are doing it
l'initiative
through initiatives to reduce solitude and stimulate activities and mobilities of the resident.
The Association des auxiliaires du centre d'accueil Champlain over the years has participated and contributed on several ways, façons. Créer un programme visant à remettre à
They now have a program to offer a welcome kit. They also have the main room, and they're also helping the resident in palliative care. They're also organizing special activities when it's Mother's Day, Father's Day, Christmas, and other special days. They also have monthly events. They also have an annual carnival as well as barbecues. Lately, a good part of the financing is to help improve the garden of the center.
Space, and it can make it mobility friendly so all residents can enjoy it. Enfin, de souligner les actions bénévoles extraordinaires de l'organisme.
To talk about the extraordinary action of the organization and its contribution to the community, it's a pleasure for me to give her the Builders Award as the president of the Association of the Auxiliaires du Centre d'accueil. I would like to invite her colleagues to come over.
Votre conseil is working remotely today.
Félicitations, félicitations.
Congratulations.
Ça fait la fois, ça l'a fait, bon,
Sorry, I'm emotional. It's a real honor and privilege to receive the Builders Award on behalf of the Champlain Center. It's possible to work with them with the continuous support that we have from the Council in the City of Ottawa. This is a work that we're doing to improve our city. I would like also to thank Monsieur Mathieu Fleury. Over the last few years, he was there with his presence, his sense of humor, his permanent support, so that we could actually improve what we were doing at the center. We were able to put forward some initiative at the center for our resident. We wanted to improve the quality of life of the resident, and that's the reason why we're today accepting the Builders Award.
to the City of Ottawa residents and our numerous associations, of which there are too many to name, for their financial and attendance during our fundraisers campaign. Thank you. Merci.
Roll call, please, Madam Deputy Clerk.
Counselor Lula,
Je suis présent.
Counselor Dudas,
Ici.
Counselor Harder. Here. Counselor Curry,
Here.
Councillor El Shantiri,
Present.
Councillor Gower,
EC.
Councillor Kavanaugh. Here. Councillor Shirelli. Councillor Eglai.
Here.
Councillor Deans.
Here.
Councillor Tierney.
Present.
Conseiller Fleury.
Ici.
Councillor King.
Present.
Councillor McKenney.
Present.
Councillor Leeper.
Good morning.
Councillor Brockington.
Here.
Councillor Menard.
Here.
Cloutier.
Present.
Councillor Kitts. Here. Councillor DeRuse.
Here.
Councillor Moffat.
Here.
Councillor Meehan.
I'm here.
Councillor Hubley.
Here.
Mayor Watson.
EC.
You have a quorum, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Confirmation of minutes, adoption de procès verbaux pour le 6 juillet. Carried.
Carried.
Declaration of interest arising, including those originally arising from prior meetings. Association Municipalities of Ontario information, other communications received, regrets, no regrets were filed. Motion to introduce reports, motion portant présentation de rapport, conseiller Curry et Eglai, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That the Built Heritage Subcommittee Report 29, Planning Committee Report 65 and 66, the reports from the City Clerk entitled Summary of Oral and Written Public Submissions for Items Subject to the Planning Act, explanation requirements at the City Council meeting of July 6, 2022, and the status update council inquiries and motions for the period ending August 26, 2022, be received and considered.
Carried. Adopté. Excuse me. City Clerk, a status update, council inquiries and motions, rapport de situation, received. Build Heritage Subcommittee Report number 29, rapport numéro 29 de sous-comité de patrimoine bâti. Item 12.1, designation of York Street Public School and Glebe Collegiate Institute under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Carried.
Yes.
Item 12.2, application to alter 15 Linden Terrace, a property designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act, located in the Clemo-Monkland Driveway and Linden Terrace Heritage Conservation District. Carried.
Carried.
Item 13, Planning Committee Report number 65, rapport numéro 66 du Comité de l'Urbanisme, Parkland Dedication Bylaw Replacement and Cash in lieu of Parkland Funds Policy Revision. Councillor Gower and Moffat have an amendment. Councillor Gower, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this is a technical amendment. Whereas the report proposes the repeal of bylaw 2009-95 as amended, being the Parkland Dedication Bylaw and adoption of a new Parkland Dedication Bylaw. Therefore, be it resolved with respect to the report, council amend the proposed bylaw as follows. 1, within section 1 definitions, delete the definition for nonprofit organization and replace with the following. Nonprofit housing means housing which is or is intended to be offered primarily to persons or households of low income and which is owned or operated by a nonprofit corporation, being a corporation, no part of the income of which is payable to or otherwise available for the personal benefit of a member or shareholder thereof, or a nonprofit housing cooperative having the same meaning as in the Cooperative Corporations Act, RSO 1990, CC 35, as may be amended from time to time. And 2, within section 11.2, delete the proposed provision E and replace with the following: residential purposes or the residential portion of a mixed-use development that are erected and owned by nonprofit housing, provided that satisfactory evidence is provided to the treasurer that the dwelling units and or rooming units are intended for persons of low or modest incomes, and that the dwelling units and or rooming units are being made available at values that are initially and will continue to be below current market levels in the city. So this motion is just intended to tighten up the language to make sure that we're not leaving the door too open for nonprofits, and that we're really focused on nonprofit housing, and that the definitions reflect that in the final report recommendation.
Okay, thank you. So, Councillor Meehan, is yours a quick question, or should we come back to this?
Well, I would like us, Mr. Mayor, to, I think, come back to us. I think that
Okay, we'll do that
I
then.
think this is important that we should have a bit of a discussion. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll come back to that. Item 13.2, zoning bylaw amendment 108 Nepean Street and 257 Lisgar. There'll be discussion on that. Same with the next item on Nepean. We'll come back to that. Zoning bylaw amendment 100 Stacy Drive. Councillor Curry, seconded by myself, has a deferral motion. Councillor Curry, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Whereas the proposed residential development of 258 residential units at 100 Stacy is proposed for an area that is characterized by industrial development, and whereas the Planning Committee held on August 25th, 2022, significant issues of compatibility were raised by those making oral submissions to the committee, and whereas there are further concerns with respect to the ability of the road network to handle increased traffic and accessibility of future residents to transit, and whereas the ward council wishes to have further discussions before this matter is considered by council, therefore be it resolved that the zoning amendment report in respect of 100 Stacy Drive be deferred until the next regular meeting of council. And be it further resolved that no further notice be given pursuant to the Planning Act subsection 3417.
Okay, on deferral. Carried. Right. Next, excuse me, is application for demolition of new construction at 229, 231, 241, 245, and 247 Beechwood Avenue, a property designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Demande de démolition et de nouvelle construction 229, 231, 241, 245 et 247 Avenue Beechwood. Carrie?
Carrie.
Excuse me. Item 14.4, zoning bylaw amendment 280 Laurier Avenue East, modification de règlement de zonage de 80 Avenue Laurier Est. Carried. Item 14.5, community benefits charge strategy and bylaw, règlement municipal et stratégie sur les redevances pour avantages communautaires. Councillor Moffat and Eglai have a motion. Councillor Moffat, please.
Thank you. Whereas report ACS 2022 PIE GEN 0004 proposes implementing a community benefit charge to ensure that growth pays for growth, and whereas pursuant to provincial legislation section 37 of the Planning Act will lapse on September 18th, 2022, removing the ability for the city to capture density bonusing for significant developments. And whereas there are development applications that would typically be subject to section 37 agreement, but for which an agreement has not been made, and for which the intent is to finalize an agreement prior to September 18th, 2022. Therefore, be resolved with respect to the report. Council approve that all development applications for which a complete application has been received and which would otherwise be required to enter into a section 37 agreement, but for which there is no agreement as of adoption of the community benefits charge bylaw, will be exempt from the transitionary provisions under clause 26 of the proposed community benefits charge bylaw as detailed in document 3, and that the draft bylaw be amended accordingly.
Okay, does anyone wish to have a discussion on this, or should we come back to it? I see no hands up. Oh, Councillor Fleury, is it brief, or would you like to come back?
Just a quick question to staff on the motion, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, go ahead.
So I see no red flag immediately when I read the motion and hear it now, but I want to understand most properties do not have section 37. So can I just hear it in terms of once the CBC charge and this transition clause is passed, the new CBC charge would apply to properties who typically had not required a section 37 benefit, but withstanding the previous submissions. Is that fair to, like, that's what I understand of it. I want to clarify because the idea is really, my understanding of the report is really to bring some uniformity to our land protection efforts.
Mr. Mayor, I can speak to the question. The intent of the motion is to narrow the scope of the current transitionary provision in the bylaw. The current transitionary provision says that in-stream developments will not be subject to the charge. The motion would exempt from the benefit of that transitionary provision applications development, which is already in stream and which would be subject to the Section 37 agreement requirement, they would then have to pay the community benefits charge. So it is narrowing the scope of the transitionary provision slightly to ensure that development, which would have to enter into a Section 37 agreement, now has to pay a community benefits charge.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so on the motion by Councillor Moffat and Eglai, carried. On the report as amended, carried. Next, the bulk consent agenda. We have a number of items that have technical amendment requirements, but does anyone wish to remove anything from the bulk consent agenda before we go on to those that require a technical amendment? Councillor Gower, did you have one on?
But I think you're aware of, I have 3 technical amendments, and Councillor Eglai has 1 that are all related to planning files.
So on that, the first one is report 15.2.4, which is zoning bylaw 101 and 201 Nipissing Court. Councillor, if you want to just introduce the motion, do you have a seconder?
I believe it's Councillor Curry, because it is in Connecticut.
Oh, yeah, I think Councillor Curry for all 3 of yours, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct,
yes.
Councillor? So I think you can just do the summary, Councillor, because these are all technical amendments where a word was missing and so on. So,
well, exactly. So this one is a technical amendment to eliminate redundancies and add clarity. So whereas the report recommends amending the City of Ottawa zoning bylaw to permit light industrial uses in a general mixed use zone, and whereas redundancies and inconsistencies were identified between document 2, details of recommended zoning, the parent GM zone, and the purpose of the report, therefore be it resolved that the report be amended, and the clerk's team is scrolling it on the screen there. I'll let you go through that. I won't read all of these changes. Therefore, be it resolved that there be no further notice pursuant to Section 3417 of the Planning Act.
okay, on the motion, carried, adopted. The next is also by Councillor Gower and Curry, and it is official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment for 525 Leggett Drive and 359 Terry Fox Drive. Councillor Gower, please.
Thank you. So whereas the report proposes to amend the official plan and the zoning bylaw to permit a mixed-use development, residential and commercial at 525 Leggett Drive and 359 Terry Fox Drive, and whereas staff identified ambiguity in document 2, details of recommended official plan amendment, and whereas staff identified an error in document 3, details of recommended zoning, therefore be it resolved that document 2 be amended by deleting the words "and the attached schedules" from document 2, part B, the amendment, section 1, introduction, and therefore be it further resolved that document 3 be amended by replacing the words "at least" in document 3, section 2B4 with the word "within," and therefore be it further resolved that there be no further notice pursuant to Section 3417 of the Planning Act.
Okay, thank you. That's seconded by Councillor Curry. On the motion, carried. On the report as amended, carried.
Carried.
Thank you. The next one, also by Councillor Gower, seconded by Councillor Curry, is official plan and zoning bylaw amendments 570 and 600 March Road. Councillor Gower, please.
Yes, okay, the last technical amendment for me. Whereas the report recommends amending the City of Ottawa zoning bylaw to permit major office development and residential uses in a mixed-use commercial zone, and whereas a change to the concept reduced the zoning height permissions on the site to a maximum of 30 stories, which resulted in there being inconsistencies and provisions that were no longer necessary in document 3, details of recommended zoning, and whereas Area B in document 4 erroneously identifies the current zoning of Area B as IP6, therefore be it resolved that respect to the report document 3 be amended by replacing section 2C with the following, and I will not read all of these changes, but they are scrolling on the screen. Therefore, be it further resolved that document 4 zoning key map in the report be replaced with the attachment to this motion, and therefore be it further resolved that there be no further notice pursuant to Section 3417 of the Planning Act.
On the amendment, Carried. Adopté.
Carried.
On the report as amended. Carried.
Carried.
Councillor Eglai.
I just said carried, Mr. Mayor.
Oh, sorry. Okay. The final technical amendments by Councillor El Shantiri, seconded by Councillor Gower, with respect to 1053, 1075, and 1145 March Road. Councillor El Shantiri, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And this is a technical amendment to eliminate inconsistency and add clarity. So whereas the report AC S 2022 PS 0110 proposed to amend the zoning bylaw number 2008-250 to facilitate the development of a residential subdivision comprised of a lot for 261 single detached dwelling block for 329 townhouse dwelling units, a portion of a school site, a future municipal park and ride, and a municipal fire station, environmental protection land, and various park and open space blocks. And where inconsistent were identified in document 2 detail of recommended zoning. Therefore, be it resolved that document 2 be amended by replacing the text in document 2, section 1B with the text and replacing the text in document 2, section 2A with the text and replacing the text in document 2, section 3 with the text HN, replacing the text in document 2, section 4A with the text and further, and therefore be resolved, and there are no further notes pursuant to subsection 3417 of the Planning Act. And there's a lot of replacement of X's there, so.
Okay, thank you. Questions on the amendment by Councillor El Shantiri? Carried.
Okay.
As amended, carried. Okay, now we're going back to the items. Oh, I'm sorry, we didn't, did anyone want to remove anything from the bulk consult? So on the bulk consent, carried.
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 We'll go back to Planning Committee Report number 65, rapport numéro 65 du Comité de l'Urbanisme. Councillor Gower and Moffat have tabled their amendment. Councillor Meehan, you asked that this be held.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I was not at that planning committee meeting, so I was hoping that we might have a bit of a discussion here today at council before just automatically approving this community benefits charge. Housing in Ottawa is already out of reach for most people in the city, and we are talking about increasing affordable housing for the people who want to get into the market. But this is a really unique time in our history in Ottawa. We're seeing record inflation. We're seeing the changes to our official plan and where we want people, with the builders to build. And I'm worried at this point that no matter how well intentioned the community benefits charge is, that we are in fact piling on to the people who we need to build our homes in this city. So I'm wondering if, and there's one provision actually in the motion that I just want to read, because I'm wondering if this should be discussed before we actually approve. It says, we're going to direct staff, as part of this proposal, direct staff to review the accumulated impact of these major legislative and policy changes, which are anticipated to have an impact on land prices and market conditions, and then report back to committee. Well, I'm concerned that we are at a tipping point right now in our history when it comes to housing in our city. So if we, no matter how well intentioned this is, what if I think we might be at that tipping point that the houses are going to be too expensive to build, and the builders are just going to say, enough is enough. We've heard over the term of this council that the builders are struggling to build the homes, make them as affordable. And when we add on, those prices are going to go back onto the people who are going to buy them. So if they can't, their margins are getting too thin. I think I'm worried that some of the developers are just going to pick up and move someplace else. So I was hoping that we could have a discussion today about tipping points. And, is anyone else worried that this will have the reverse effect that we really, that we're hoping to have? Yes, growth should pay for growth. And I would love to see more green space everywhere. But if it's not possible, I mean, yes, the developers have deep pockets, and we want them to pay their fair share. But are we at that tipping point? That's what I'm asking today. I would hope that some of you have concerns about this as well.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Any questions or comments on either the Gower-Moffat motion or the main report? Councillor Gower?
Well, I guess briefly, I am concerned. Housing affordability is a huge concern. This is any policy or any fees that we add have an impact on housing in our city. So I'm definitely concerned. I would say I take the feedback we've had from developers very seriously. They've told us that any additional fees or any additional policy that we add has an impact. I believe them. The extent to which it impacts the viability of housing, I think I do take with a grain of salt. And we've had some good advice from our staff at committee around what the true impact may be. There is a plan to review as we go forward in the coming years where these different fees are at. The challenge we have is we have set, I think, some reasonable targets with what we want to achieve on parkland in our city. And we have parkland dedication and cash in lieu as a financial option to pay for that. Mm-hmm. It may not be the perfect way to do that, but it is the option and it is the legislated ability that we have to collect money and to collect land for parkland. And if we don't pass this today, we lose that opportunity. It will not exist anymore. And unless councilors around the table have another suggestion on how we can collect the money in order to meet our parkland goals, this is a way that we have to generate that revenue and ensure that when we're building new communities and building within existing communities, that we're also able to build parkland and other amenities to support residents and create healthier communities.
Thank you, Councillor.
Should we not study the impacts maybe before, the potential impacts, and then before? Because what if the impacts are negative?
Sorry, someone else is before you, unless you've had your intervention. Councillor Hubley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I share many of the concerns that Councillor Meehan has put on this, that what's the impact of not just this policy, because there's a lot of good trying to be done in this policy, but it's a cumulative effect of all the things that we've approved this year to add to the cost of new housing that I think we're going to put owning that first home out of reach to many people. And yes, there's a clause in here to review in 3 years, but we can do a lot of damage in 3 years with all these impacts here. I like the work that Mr. Chenier and Mr. Weary did on this policy. I think there's a lot of good stuff in here. It's just when you add it to all the other things that I think we've got to find a way to mitigate the impact here on the cost of new homes so that we can continue to build in transit-oriented development areas and as well as across the city to meet the future needs of residents of the city for what the projected housing needs are going to be. And this does not contribute to that. And so I'll be dissenting unless it goes to yeas and nays, but I can't, because of the cumulative effect, I can't support this. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Shirelli.
Thank you, Your Worship. I agree with Councillors Hubley and Meehan. We just passed an official plan that Ottawa Business Journal did an analysis of and determined we had added $100,000 per unit to the cost of new housing. And yet that official plan's goal, one of its major goals, was to provide affordable housing. I don't see how you do that while increasing the cost of housing by $100,000 per unit. And then we turn around and do this So I guess first question I have is, what percentage of our cash in lieu of parkland money is actually spent to provide park land as opposed to incorporate fixes to existing parks?
Who on staff will answer that, Mr. Chenier? Sorry, if we can get Mr. Chenier's mic to turn on, please.
Working now? Okay, thank you. Mr. Mayor, it's not a figure that we have citywide. We'd certainly be happy to provide the councillor with that information.
Because I know areas in my ward that need parkland, like Cityview. The problem we have is we may have the money to buy it, but there's no land, and they're not making any new land. So that becomes an issue. But the cost of housing is one of the major drivers for the price of housing, which is also a driver regarding affordable housing. So I think we should have kept that in mind and had this discussion earlier. So I'll be dissenting at this point.
Okay, Councillor Aguilar, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to say this is very timely. I hosted a development meeting last night in my ward, and I thought it was going to be about inadequate parking, and instead it was about inadequate parks. It was a rezoning asking for a piece of land that was zoned for recreational use to be rezoned for residential. And while the community was not against a residential development, they raised, I think, the very valid point is, what's the purpose of having a new home if you have no amenities, if you have no green space? I believe that this is a step forward in trying to address that problem. I agree that it is going to factor into the affordability of the homes, but equally, I think without doing it, it will affect the attractability of the homes, whether people want to live in a neighborhood where they don't have amenities, where they don't have recreational facilities, where they don't have parks. I don't think this is a perfect fix, but I think it's a step in the right way. And I think we do need a number of years to see how it all shakes out before a reasonable and helpful review can be done. So I concur with Co-Chair Gower that this is a prudent way forward, and there will be a review, and we'll see how it works. But right now, people are very concerned about moving into neighborhoods or buying homes where they don't have any facilities, where they don't have any parks. And to Councillor Meehan's point, the developers are going to pick up and leave. Equally, I think people could pick up and leave and say, we're going to move to a town where there are parks. We're going to move to a city where there are recreational facilities close by, and we can have a 15-minute neighborhood. So we have to balance that, but I think this is a reasonable balance. I think it's good work by staff and the proviso to bring it back after a reasonable period of time, see what the overall impacts have been, and to amend it or tweak it at that point, I think is quite reasonable. So I'll be supporting this morning.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Moffat.
Thanks. I just know there's a bit of confusion as to what we're talking about. There was, this is of course the parkland policy. The community benefits charge is something that will come later. I know there are two extra things that do seem to add cost to housing, but I mean, we talk about cumulative effects of the various policies, including high performance development standards, development charges. Of course, we aren't at inclusionary zoning yet. That hasn't even been approved. So it's a bit hypothetical to be talking about the impact of that. But I think you have to consider, if you're going to vote against something because of a cumulative effect, what's the replacement? So Section 37 is gone. As of September 18th, Section 37 doesn't exist. So that's why the community benefits charge is coming in. We already have a parkland policy on cash in lieu of parkland. That's what this is. We're just looking to revise it so that we're making more sense of applications as to when they come forward, as to what type of building it is, what the needs are. development charges. Do you want to shift away from development charges? Do you want to add an exemption to development charge? Do you want to make the downtown core once again development charge free, or TODs development charge free? You can do that, but of course you'll have to say, well, where's the money going to come from? We'll have to add it to tax base and bring the taxes up higher to accommodate the thing that you just pulled away money from. No one out there is saying, hey, listen, we have too much money to spend on DC projects. So can you slow down with all the DC projects that you're doing because you have so much money? No one's actually telling us that. All the various things that we have, none of these things get more affordable as we go. So if you want to defer items, if you want to freeze development charges, if you want to defer community benefits charge, if you want to just forego certain things, you can do that. But you're not actually making the job any easier for the next term of council, the term of council after that. These things don't become less expensive in the years ahead. So even if you delayed something for 2, 3, 4 years, none of this becomes cheaper to do. The problem doesn't go away just because we push it off, because we're pretending that it's going to make things more affordable for people. So I think you have to look at it more and just in the silo of someone saying that, hey, listen, all these things are adding pressures to us. Nobody's talking about any solutions. Every time someone says it's too expensive, okay, give me a solution. Give me a reasonable, logical solution. Tell me of the things that we're adding, the things that we're asking for. Tell me which one doesn't matter. I never get an answer on that. That's it.
Thank you. Councillor Leeper, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, this is certainly going to make parkland dedication a little more expensive for the developers, but we need the parks. In response to the councillor from College Ward's question about how much is being spent on things like park renewals versus acquisition, I can say that in Kitchissippi, we have pivoted to acquisition. Recently, I acquired a corner lot in an area that is not well served by parks, in which you have to cross arterial roads in order to get to a play structure. The intensification that's occurring in that neighborhood means that there are a lot more kids. They don't have a proper park facility without crossing a major road. And, that parcel was expensive. Land is not inexpensive in Wellington Village. So in order to be able to provide a park, I need to have some resources available in order to be able to do that. This is an increase in how much we're collecting for parkland, but it's not a change in approach. We continue to need to acquire land to build parks. Otherwise, we're building an unsustainable and unlivable city. Having the resources available to build parks means that we're going to have land available upon which to plant trees. And when you take a look at those heat maps of what the city looks like as it becomes more and more of a concrete jungle, we need those parcels in order to be able to provide the opportunity for canopy tree, again, in order to be able to create a sustainable and a livable city. I absolutely understand that this is a slight increase in cost versus what our historical approach on parkland has been, but it's an important one to do in order to make sure that those homes that people are purchasing are in neighborhoods where there are adequate play structures, where there are adequate recreation facilities, where there is the adequate ability to plant trees in order to counter the heat sink effects that we're seeing exacerbated every year. I don't have a ton of sympathy for the developers' position on this one, when residents have been so clear that we need more parks, not fewer. We don't have an alternative measure. This is the tool that the province has given us, and I will absolutely be supporting the staff recommended approach. Thank you very much, Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Shantiri, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And if I can ask Dan or Kevin, why is now? And maybe you can explain it, why this report came now.
Mr. Mayor, as has been mentioned, much like the community benefits charge, September 18th is a deadline that the province has set by which the city has to replace its park dedication bylaw. And so staff have worked quite a bit over the last year to be in a position to bring this forward in time for the deadline.
So my understanding, if we don't pass this today, we go back to the old policy, which is you'll be able to collect less for park. Is that my understanding correct?
That is correct, Mr. Mayor. If this policy is not approved, then the city would no longer be able to take the same level of parkland dedication as development applications come forward.
And is it correct, my understanding, in the past, if you build in a low rise, medium rise, or high rise, they were paying the same, and this was about equity between the low, medium, and high rise, because the high rise was paying a lot less than compared to the low rise.
Mr. Mayor, that is correct, that the current system does lead to some inequities based on the density of the projects. And we have tried to address this while still keeping project affordability in mind. So based on the consultant's report, we did pull back a little bit in terms of the charge that would go to high density development, but still bring us a step forward in terms of a more equitable application of the fee.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Shiny. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Kavanaugh, please.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Very much like my colleague in Kitchissippi, I'm seeing the need for acquiring parkland, and it's going to be happening particularly as we build the stage 2 stations and we're having development around those stations. We need to balance that out, and this is the only way we can. Developers come in, they have a parcel of land, they're filling it with residential units. That's what we're asking for, but we need some balance out, and we need more green space. A lot of these areas don't have enough green space as it is. So that's the one pressure point that we need to deal with. So I appreciate the work that has been put into this by staff. I think this should go forward, and I think it's going to be very beneficial to areas that are seeing this intensification, particularly around transit stations. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kitts, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think we've heard a couple of times today that this seems to be an imperfect solution, but deferral would obviously have a detrimental impact on what we're able to collect for our communities. So, question to staff: can you explain why the review on the accumulated impact is set at 3 years, and would it be helpful to have that review conducted sooner?
Mr. Mayor, the cumulative review was a recommendation by Councillor Gower at Planning Committee, and we agreed to it because there are several items still to come. The impact of community benefits charges will be learned as we go. Plus, we have the development charge bylaw being reviewed by, I believe it's May of 2024. So once we start adding these up, we now have a greater idea as to what is the financial impact of everything that's being discussed, including the future inclusionary zoning bylaw.
The soonest that we could take a hard look at this, in your opinion?
In my opinion, there's others from other departments as well, but with the known items coming forward on their schedules, the soonest that we'll have greater clarity is within that time frame.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Gower, have you spoken on this?
I have. I was just hoping to make a quick wrap up on the motion that I introduced.
Oh, yes. Okay. You can do that. Go ahead.
It's going to be very quick.
Does anyone else wish to speak before Councillor Gower wraps up on his motion? Okay, Councillor Gower.
Mr. Mayor,
On the question of affordability, Mr. Mayor, this motion is intended to clarify that we are exempting nonprofit low-income housing from this this parkland dedication bylaw. And that's important. We are recognizing that affordability is important, community housing is important, and this is a way to ensure that we are not harming in any way the viability of nonprofit housing development anywhere in our city. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, so we have the motion by Councillor Gower, seconded by Councillor Moffat. Carried. And then the main report as amended, yeas and nays have been called.
Councillor Cloutier? Councillor Moffat?
Yes.
Councillor Hubley? Councillor Kitts?
Yes.
Conseiller Fleury?
Wait.
Councillor Gower?
Yes.
Councillor McKenney?
Yes.
Councillor Leeper?
Yes.
Councillor King?
Yes.
Councillor Tierney?
Yes.
Councillor Shirelli?
No.
Councillor Dudas?
Yes.
Councillor Menard?
Yes.
Councillor Brockington?
Yes.
Councillor Kavanaugh? Councillor Harder?
Yes.
Councillor Lulov?
Yes.
Councillor Curry?
Yes.
Councillor Meehan?
Yes.
Councillor Deans?
Yes.
Councillor El Shantiri?
Yes.
Councillor Eglai?
Yes.
Councillor DeRuse?
No.
Mayor Watson?
Yes.
Apologies.
20 yeas, 3 nays.
Excuse me, I was just stepped out, but I'm back in. Yay.
What's that? With the will of council, to allow Councillor Kavanaugh to vote.
Thank you.
Agreed.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I think we've agreed to allow her to vote. Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, 21-3.
Okay, thank you. Carries. Next item that was held is 13.2 zoning bylaw amendment 108 Nepean Street, part of 257 Lisgar Avenue. And there's no motions that I'm aware of on this item. Councillor Gower, do you have your hand up for 13.2?
I do. Just a minor procedural note. In the final agenda, there's a note that says the position of ward councillor, this report is citywide in nature. And I just wanted to make a note for the clerk's office to make sure that it's in the final agenda or final report from this meeting. It's not a citywide report. And I just want to make sure that the disposition from this meeting reflects the correct information.
Okay, the clerk has noted that. So on this item, carried.
Carried.
Next is item 14, Planning Committee Report 66, Zoning Bylaw Amendment 142, 144, and 148 Nepean, and Demolition 142 Nepean Street. And Councillor Gower, I believe, has a motion, seconded by Councillor Moffat. So Councillor Gower, if you'd like to introduce the motion on item 14, please.
Yeah, thank you. So this is regarding the memorandum of understanding, whereas the proposed memorandum of understanding in respect of 142 Nepean Street has been revised to permit to tenants the choice of $15,000 or to have the rent in a new unit as defined to continue to be subject to the limit of the guideline increases under the Residential Tenancies Act. Therefore, be it resolved that document 4 attached to Planning Committee Report 66, item 1, be replaced with the document attached to this motion. The very quick explanation of this is at the Planning Committee discussion last week, a number of councillors raised concerns with the applicant or asked the applicant to make this change in the memorandum of understanding. Staff has agreed to it. The applicant has agreed to it. In fact, I understand the applicant has already signed the MOU reflecting this. So procedurally, just want to ensure that this is reflected in the final information that's approved by council today.
Okay, thank you. So on item 14, Councillor McKenney, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to reiterate some of the comments that were made at committee and urge my colleagues to think carefully about what we're approving here. So 108 Nepean has been approved. It will add 300 units to the housing stock. This is a difficult file sometimes to follow because we've got three different owners asking for two different things. And these reports should have never been linked. The precedence that this sets at this council really could lead us down a path where we are removing missing middle housing, affordable market housing, in order to provide more parking anywhere in this city. And just a couple of weeks ago, we were talking, I like to talk about housing affordability. Well, just a few weeks ago, for the first time in our history, market rent for a 2-bedroom apartment in this city went well over $2,000. What we don't have enough of in this city is this type of housing. We do not have enough affordable market rental for individuals, for families. And these small buildings are scattered across our city. What we do have a lot of is parking, excess parking. In what is a housing emergency that we're living through, we had over 2,000 people last night sleeping in a shelter or outside in this city. We've got hundreds of families, children living in motels. Our staff work hard to house people, but for every one unit of social housing that we build in this city, we lose at least 7 in the private market. And that's what's happening here. We're being asked to remove housing, and the latest argument is that at least we're taking care of the people who are there. We're going to move them into new housing, at least two out of the 6. But people fled as soon as they heard that this was coming. People get worried. They worry about their children. They worry about their kids in school, having their housing taken from them. So it's not the conversation that we should be having in 2022 in the middle of a housing emergency and a climate crisis. So we've got a lot right beside 142 where 2 homes came down a few years ago, and I worked hard with staff to ensure that they wouldn't be turned into a parking lot, that we would see development there. And I got pushback, and here we are today. And we're looking at turning the entire lot into a parking lot. And there are hundreds of parking spaces not being used within a 2-block radius of this lot. So if we allow ourselves to be, held hostage here with an applicant that says, well, I won't, won't build this unless you allow us to take down this. Where does it end? Where do we say no? And quite frankly, if there were, if this really was just about more stock, which we all want, nobody doesn't want more housing stock. Why not take down 142 and then build on that entire parking lot? Easily could accommodate yet another 300. So I'm going to plead with you on the basis that these two should have never been linked, and to ask you to consider this report just based on the merits of what you're being asked to do. Remove a 6-unit affordable market rental to build a parking lot in a downtown when we have a climate crisis, and when, quite frankly, Fewer and fewer people are traveling into the downtown, and we have to encourage more people to take transit. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Menard.
Thank you very much, Mayor. And I just want to go to staff just to make sure on this vote that we're getting to where I'm trying to get to, which is the parcel for 142 can remain residential lot, whether it's that 6 unit or another residential in the future, it remains residential. And that the rest of it, the rest of the proposal, we've already approved the 300 units, but the 144, 148 is allowed for service parking where there's ample space with no residential there now. So I want to get to that to make sure staff have a motion. I did talk to the clerk earlier where council can vote on that specifically. So the 300's passed already, but the 142, the one piece, which is about 8 parking spots by our math, 8 to 10, that one would remain residential. So if staff can work on that, that would be great. And here's the rationale for it. We had 60 parking spots here before in total. Okay. So we're trading that now for a 166 space underground parking garage. And then they're also asking for 30 space surface lots. So 196 spots. So we're giving up 60 spaces and they're giving up 60 and getting 196 in return. And they talked a lot at planning committee about I think their term was controlling their own parking destiny. Okay. And so I think giving up a 60 space parking lot to get 196 in return, you can control your parking destiny that way. And so what we're saying is, look, let's not rezone something for surface parking lot for those 8 spots and let's keep the residential there. There's no way that 27-story development is going to be contingent on tearing down 142 for 8 parking spaces. There's no way. And if it is, then that's just foolish and completely unreasonable. And I don't think we want to negotiate with people that are unreasonable. So in this case, I guess I'm asking staff to tell us how we can make sure we're voting for the rest of this. But on that one piece for those 8, we're talking 8 parking spaces instead of the residential housing and rezoning for it. Please tell us how we can vote against that one piece. I don't think it's just clause B. I think there's a clause A, which has 142 included in it in the rezoning. And I want to make sure we single that out. So staff can help me with that piece so that councillors can vote against that one portion. We keep that residential instead of surface parking, and the rest of it can be used as the developers asked for. If you can do that, that would be fantastic. So maybe I'll go to staff, Chair. Is that fine?
Sorry, what?
Just to go to staff to ask for that to be drawn up.
Right, who on staff can answer this?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will have to take that away because that would completely change all the zoning details. So we'd have to take that piece away.
All right, Councillor Menard, are you asking the staff draft a motion for you?
Yeah, so I talked to the clerk earlier this meeting, but it's essentially to make sure that, so Councillor Brockenden had voted against clause B at the planning committee. That prevents the demolition, but it didn't prevent the rezoning of a residential lot to surface parking for 142. And that's the only piece I'm asking to be taken care of as part of this motion so that council has a vote on this that allows everything else to go forward except for that one piece for 8 parking spots, given this is right on LRT. And we have a new official plan, which says we should be doing the opposite to what this motion says. So if we can draft that up, I just gave a heads up previously, and I'm asking staff to draft something so that council can have that vote on that one piece.
Councillor Menard, you can vote against the specific recommendation, item 2, which is the demolition, if you don't want that. So I'm not sure.
Well, no, that's the concern. I hear what you're saying, Mayor, and I'll certainly vote against the item B, but that's not going to do it for the rezoning. And that's my concern, is we're rezoning a residential for surface parking for 8 parking spaces, and it's not reasonable. So I want to make sure in clause A, we remove 142. I'm sure staff can draft this up fairly easily. We remove 142 from clause A and vote against B. That I want to make sure we get to that specific vote.
So let me ask Tim Mark if that's possible.
It's been drafted and it has been sent to clerks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
So who's it been sent to?
Yeah, I sent it to clerks, Mr. Mayor, for formatting.
All right, so we'll have to get that circulated. So Councillor Menard, you still have a minute left.
Okay, well, just to wrap up on this and appreciate staff with their quick action. We are building a 27-story development here. There's going to be 166 underground parking spaces there. They're going to have other surface parking at 144, 148. All we're doing here is preventing 8 parking spaces from taking over residential. We shouldn't be rezoning residential for surface, no matter what the situation. And Councillor McKenney's comments around affordable housing and surface parking and this area are bang on. And we need to listen to that in terms of how these things were linked. So I think we can support the development. They're going to build it here, but those 8 parking spaces, I think they can find 8 parking spaces somewhere else. So let's be reasonable and work together on this. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, Councillor Shirelli.
Thank you, Your Worship. When I've listened to how various councillors are talking about dealing with this, and the best way to make those things happen, if it's actually what council wants to do, is to buy the property. But one thing everyone seems to be forgetting here is we do not own this property. And the property owner has rights and has come forward exercising those rights with a plan. And as part of an overall proposal, there is a net gain of housing units to this area of a significant number, over 290. I'm not sure what the exact number is, but I don't think you can pick apart the context of different segments of the overall plan, the proposal that's being put into effect. And by picking it apart, try to get what you would want if you owned it. So I look at this and it seems to make a lot of sense to go forward in good faith with the proposal as is and in the context it was presented. And we end up with much more housing than we would have without it. Thank you.
Councillor Moffat, please.
Thanks. I don't really want to be overly repetitive with what I've said on this at committee, but I don't disagree that if this was just an application to tear down a building for a parking lot, we don't approve it. We know that the official plan says that. I understand the frustration that it's linked together. They are. I mean, you can't really argue that they could be unlinked. The reality is they are connected through a variety of owners, which makes it complex. It makes the ownership of the various properties complex. You know, a bigger picture, this is a block that is entirely transforming from surface parking lot to high density residential development. You know, 287 Lisgar already switched from a surface parking lot to a high rise, and we've already approved buildings to the west of these properties for that same switch from surface parking lot to more higher density. You know, there's obviously a struggle with market rent versus actual affordability. That's a conversation that we've had. That's a conversation we just had last night at an Ottawa community housing meeting about the discrepancy between market affordability and where, let's say, OCH's rentals are at. It's a huge discrepancy, and it's something that needs to be addressed, but can't be addressed by a municipality alone. It needs to be a more involvement in that. But on this one alone, and the comment I made at committee, there's people here. There's people involved here, and I think if there weren't, it's a different conversation. You know, you call the bluff on 108 and say, well, we think you're going to build it no matter what. So we're going to challenge that decision on 142 and 144 and 148 because we think that you're going to build 108 no matter what. There's really no loss for us there, to be fair. In that scenario, there's no loss for us. This memorandum of understanding is strong. It's good for those residents. Housing long term is always better, but there's no bright future here. There's not a brighter future if we vote this down today for the residents of 142 Nepean. the current owner of that building is clearly willing to sell it so it can be torn down. Changing the owner of it, voting this down and leaving it in their hands to sell it again in the future doesn't change the future for the residents of 142. It doesn't make it brighter. It doesn't guarantee that they're going to have a better deal in the future. And I think that's again what I said at committee is where I sort of fall on this, is that we could make a decision today that risks that memorandum of understanding and risks what's being offered to these tenants. And I don't think it's a risk that I'd be willing to take, similar to other agreements that we've had elsewhere, that I can sleep at night. I'm fine. I have a home. But these folks, if we just let the building get torn down in 5 years from now because of a decision we made today, they're not going to be better off. So I don't believe this is something that we can play with. I think the temporary zoning here should protect 142, 144, and 148 from being permanent parking long-term. I would love to see a situation where 190 and these properties are redeveloped altogether, and it becomes a better scenario for the downtown core and less surface parking. But I think the fact that this isn't being zoned for permanence, I know there's a concern that it'll switch that way. But ultimately, I think what's in front of us, it's a better scenario than if we kick this down the road and just hope for the best for the residents at 142.
Thank you. Councillor Aguilar, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just firstly, a question to staff. So the motion that Councillor Menard's asked to be drafted and the comments that Councillor Moffat just made about not being a permanent change in zoning. Can staff comment on that? What are the parameters of the zoning remaining parking, under what conditions, for how long? Assuming the Councillor Menard's motion doesn't go ahead, what does that look like? What are we voting on?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to turn that to Mr. McCreight, the file lead on this file. Mr. McCreight.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If maybe I can get a repeat of the question to make sure I understand it correctly, but if there's a distinction between the motion that Councillor Menard referenced would result in 142 Nepean and the existing apartment remaining, meaning the vacant lots at 144 and 148 Nepean could be used for parking. I just saw the motion a moment ago. I'm not confident that the details of document 2, which are the zoning details, would result in a complying parking lot of a smaller parking configuration. I simply just don't know. If you could clarify if your question was going somewhere else.
The question is, without Councillor Menard's motion, assume it's not on the table, and the comments Councillor Moffat just made about this being not a permanent zoning change. So what are we voting on today in terms of that lot? How long can it be parking? What are the protections that it doesn't remain parking forever and reverts back to residential? That's what I want to understand.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The zoning details that are recommended in the staff report for this parking lot is that it is exclusively used for the office building at 190 O'Connor. So there is a relationship there with 190 O'Connor. So if that office disappears and this site gets redeveloped, it is not a parking lot that can stay in perpetuity unless it is serving the purpose of that office at 190 O'Connor.
Okay, thank you for that. Just a couple of brief comments, Mr. Mayor. We've heard both sides of it, that these shouldn't be tied together and that they are tied together and there's nothing we can do about that. My sense, though, is we're almost being asked to play chicken here because they are tied together. In normal course, that wouldn't be the case. It's almost like we're waiting to see who blinks first on this. And I got to be honest, I'm not all that interested in blinking today. I think that, I've scratched my head. I sat in on the meeting. I have talked to a representative of the developer, and I just cannot fathom that there is no other way to achieve these parking spots, and that the whole development would be pushed aside and not carried forward over this minor amount of parking spots. I can't connect those dots. And because I can't connect those dots, I'm not going to be able to support that approach. So just want that right. It just doesn't make sense to me that one is so contingent on the other over, and we've heard variety, 8, 10, 12, 30 parking spots, whatever the number, it's not that much in the downtown core in the present circumstance. And I just cannot understand why other arrangements can't be made, and that at least for the foreseeable future, that property will remain intact. Those people will remain in that property. That will remain a reasonably priced property because the units that are going to come in the new building, yes, they will be affordable. But as Councillor Moffat pointed out, there's a huge difference between market affordability and what's really affordable for people who need housing. So for those reasons, I will be voting with Councillor McKenney on this and take her direction and her understanding of her own ward very much into context. Thank you.
Okay, I see no other hands, so we'll have Councillor Gower's motion first, his amendment on the MOU carried. And then Councillor Menard's motion is be it resolved that recommendation 1 in respect of item 14.1 be amended by deleting 140.
Can we see the motion on the screen, please, for Councillor Menard?
Yeah, Mayor, I've asked for it to be distributed. And I can read it out for now before it goes up on the screen. It's just be it resolved that recommendation 1 in respect of item 14.1 be amended by deleting 142 Nepean. And then the second recommendations 2 to 4 would be deleted because they're related to 142 Nepean.
And Mr. Mayor, I believe that Mr. Mark had added an amendment to that, which is that no further notice be given under the Planning Act.
Agreed.
Yeah, so this would allow for them to find 8 other parking spots, keep that zoned residential, regardless of what happens to it in the future. It would be residential in the future. So would appreciate the support on this. Thank you.
You want to wrap up, Councillor, or was that your wrap up?
Thank you. No, that's great. Yeas and nays is on it. I think you're
right. Yeah, just on the Menard motion and then the main motion. The Menard motion, in essence, would kill the project. There's no question that this is a challenging file, but I think you have to look at the net benefits to the greater community. There'll be 300 much needed apartments and above ground floor commercial on an underutilized site, 25 new affordable housing units compared to the 6 that are there now. And the developer is committed to working with CMHC to provide those additional units that the city desperately needs. Taking care of the individuals, the last 2 families who are left at the property. I've never seen a more generous agreement that will allow these individuals to remain at the same level of rent for a number of years, including increasing by, I think, $15,000 funding to help them on a go-forward basis and give them some certainty over the next several years that they don't have right now. Because if anyone else comes and takes over this file, there's no commitment at all for those last 2 remaining tenants. So I would urge members not to support the Menard motion. We talk a lot around this council table about providing more housing, particularly in the downtown core. We need more people working in the downtown core, quite frankly, because we see the challenges our small business community in downtown Ottawa is facing and urban Ottawa is facing as a result of people not going back to work in the office towers. So how do we supplement that opportunity to help those struggling small businesses? We try to make it easier for people to come and live downtown if they're not necessarily all going to come back and work downtown. So if this project fails, and you know, some people have said, who's going to blink first? Well, at the end of the day, property owners do have the right to come forward and ask for these kinds of amendments, and we have the right to say yay or nay to them. But at the end of the day, it sends a rather bizarre signal that we are going to go from 6 affordable units to at least 25, and then overall 300 new units of people living downtown in 1 and 2 and 3 bedroom apartments. So I would urge you to think long and hard about the importance of us sending the signal as a city that we want these kinds of infill projects to take place to get people to live and to work and to visit our downtown core. So on the Menard motion, yeas and nays, please.
Councillor Cloutier,
No.
Councillor Moffat,
No.
Councillor Hubley, Councillor Kitts,
No.
Conseiller Fleury,
Oui.
Councillor Gower,
Yes.
Councillor McKenney,
Yes.
Councillor Leeper,
Yes.
Councillor King,
Yes.
Councillor Tierney,
No.
Councillor Shirelli,
No.
Councillor Dudas, Councillor Menard,
Yes.
Councillor Brockington,
Yes.
Councillor Kavanaugh,
Yes.
Councillor Harder,
No.
Councillor Luloff,
No.
Councillor Curry,
No.
Councillor Meehan,
Yes.
Councillor Deans,
Yes.
Councillor El Shantiri,
No.
Councillor Eglai,
Yes.
Councillor DeRuse,
No.
Mayor Watson,
No.
11 yeas, 13 nays.
Okay, and on the report as amended, the same vote?
Yeah.
Carry.
Reversed, no?
Reverse, yeah. Agreed? Agreed. Okay, thank you. The next item that was held, or sorry, it's not held, it's an in-camera item. City Manager and Auditor General's performance appraisal to be considered in camera pursuant to the Procedure Bylaw 2021-24 subsections 13(1)B, personal matters about an identifiable individual, including staff, and 13(1)D, labor relations or employee negotiations, the specific matters related to the City Manager and Auditor General's 2021 performance appraisal will not be reported out as they relate to personnel matters of an identifiable individual. So the clerk advises me, and maybe we can just get him to reiterate this. He's received no requests of a confidential matter to go in camera. Is that correct? And what's your advice, Mr. Clerk?
That is correct, Mr. Mayor. I have had a number of councillors speak to me directly about this particular issue. I have shared with them the results. I would be pleased to do that with any other members of council. And I respectfully don't think there's a real need to go in closed session today. Thanks.
Okay, does anyone have any in-camera questions that would require us to go in camera? Any questions that require us to go in camera? Okay, so on the report received. Item 17, motion to adopt reports. Motion portant adoption de rapport. Councillor Curry, please. Seconded by Councillor Eglai.
That the Built Heritage Subcommittee Report 29, Planning Committee Report 65 and 66, the reports from the clerk entitled Summary of Oral and Written Public Submissions for Items Subject to the Planning Act, Explanation Requirements at the City Council meeting of July 6, 2022, and the Status Update, Council Inquiries and Motions for the period ending August 26, 2022, be received and adopted as amended.
Carried. Adopté.
Carried.
Motions of which notice have been previously given. Motion dont avis a été donné entièrement. Councillor King, please. Seconded by Councillor Harder.
Thank you, Your Worship. Ottawa, like the rest of Ontario, is facing an acute shortage of family doctors. Approximately 134,000 people in our region are without a family physician. Fewer medical school graduates are choosing the specialty of family medicine after witnessing the rising expectations placed on family practices without appropriate resources and the resulting physician burnout. With insufficient administrative support and stagnant payment models, the costs to maintain a family practice are becoming unsustainable. Additionally, some physicians have decided to retire from family medicine practice earlier than planned, partially related to the exhaustion resulting from working through the COVID-19 pandemic. Indeed, nearly 3/4 of doctors surveyed by the Ontario Medical Association said they experienced some level of burnout in 2021, and 40% say they are considering early retirement because of the pandemic. We know that fewer family doctors means reduced access to care for people in Ottawa, resulting in worsening health outcomes and a less efficient healthcare system. We know that when people have a family physician who knows them well, people actually receive better care. There are better health outcomes, and the cost of the system is less. I've heard from physicians who are running family practices locally who continue to ask for more resources from the province so that they can provide more primary care to Ottawa residents. I've also heard the continuing call from residents in my area and from social service and social health agencies for the continuing call for a full community health resource center to service communities east of the Rideau River. The province also continues to lag in establishing practice-ready assessment programs to rapidly license internationally trained physicians who live here. With so many deficiencies with primary health care in our city, it's important that council asks for the substantive action, for substantive actions to really be taken to reduce waiting times for Ottawa residents in need of a family physician, and request that support be made available to establish more family medicine clinics throughout the city. I really am asking for your support here, and I thank Councillor Harder for seconding this motion. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Great, thank you. Anyone else wish to speak to the motion? On the motion as
Myself,
presented?
Mr. Mayor,
Oh, sorry,
I think I
Councillor
have my
Harder.
hand up. Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't see that. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I actually asked Councillor King if he would be interested in working on this with me. You may recall it was either the last council meeting or the one before, where we talked about other benefits that we could provide and ask questions of the province to get their assistance for better health care. When we first discussed this, he thought I was speaking about people with lower household incomes, people with more specific needs. I am not. I represent and have represented for 25 years a suburban community, and at one point, over half of the city of Nepean as far as the geography goes. And I can tell you that the need that we have in the suburbs matches, if not is greater than the need elsewhere in the city for healthcare that is one that you can count on, that you're not desperately trying to find help for your family, whomever that might be, or a friend, and you are further burdening the hospital. And I think that the timing right now in this province is perfect for us to move forward with this ask and suggestion. The province is looking for ways to provide a better level of health care. This is having our support, second largest city in the province, I think is very important. And opening up the door for various ways to do so that people can count on the fact that when their physician retires, if they have been on the waiting list for 2 years or longer, as I know many people have, and just waiting to get a family physician. Many, and as far as the people who have the greatest socioeconomic needs, not having a physician really is limiting in the help that you can receive through many of the agencies. So I hope that everyone will support this, and I hope that it will mean good, but better health, and certainly more opportunities for doctor experiences within our city. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Harder and Councillor King. So on the motion is presented, carried, adopté.
Carried.
The next notice of motion was given last meeting. It's by Councillor Dudas, seconded by Councillor Curry, please. Councillor Dudas.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll read this out. Whereas the City of Ottawa has declared a climate emergency, and whereas the new official plan calls for an ambitious target of 40% of land to be covered by trees, And as of 2017, only 31% of land was covered by trees, whereas private property makes up 40% of land in Ottawa and is identified in the Urban Forest Management Plan as a significant opportunity for urban forest enhancement. Whereas the 2018 and 2019 tornadoes, the city has worked with Tree Canada to initiate the Operation Relief program for the replacement planting of trees on private property. And whereas the May 21st derecho damaged thousands of trees across the city, many on private property, resulting in a significant loss to our urban canopy. Therefore, it be resolved that staff report back to council in Q2 of 2023 on options to support adding trees on private property for a limited period of time to allow residents to replace trees on their property that were lost due to the May storm. So if I can just speak quickly to this, I think that the motion pretty much says it all. And I think as councillors, we have all experienced the impacts of that storm on our communities. And I do vividly recall having gone out to many homes of my residents in the ward that I represent and seeing the damage that this caused, not only to their homes and their property, but to the beautiful trees that they had on their land. And I know that many residents were potentially reluctant at first to maybe even replace these trees just because of the impact of this on their homes, but also, you know, this was a very difficult storm for all of us to get through. But as time passes, I do know I've had residents reach out to me asking about our city's Trees and Trust program, which provides for the opportunity for trees to be planted on the city's right of way, but also inquiring if there's any opportunities to add trees to private spaces. So I would really look forward to staff coming back with recommendations on how we can not only encourage residents to replace the lost trees, but even enhance and increase our tree canopy. So I'm looking around the table for council's support on this. And this is really to have that reporting back feature and to understand how we can support the increase of our tree canopy.
Great, thank you. Conseil Fleury, s'il vous plaît.
Councillor Fleury, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor for moving the motion. I do have either a question to the councillor or staff. I'm not sure who is best suited to answer. We do have a Trees and Trust, which I'm often referred to by city staff in terms of a program. And I wonder, first off, if we have remaining trees in that program, and if the motion in front of us brings new funding for these sorts of initiatives. Like I just want to better understand the levers by which we're going to fund and plant more trees.
Mr. Mayor, I can take that one. The Trees and Trust program, as the councillor indicated, is for planting of trees on the city right of way, not on private property. So part of this direction right now would be looking at basically a program that would be focused on planting trees on private property. In terms of funding requirements and all that, we would bring that back as part of our report in Q2 of 2023.
This is great news. Just further to that, are you able to confirm that this program would allow for trees on different areas of a property, not just on front yards? Because I know, for example, we do get regular requests for trees in rear yards, which, as you've described by the Trees and Trust program, because they're on private property, is not eligible. So just to confirm that it does include different parts of a private property as part of your review.
Mr. Mayor, yes, at this point, when we're dealing with the private side, it wouldn't be limited to the front yard. It would be basically open to all of the private yard, as long as they meet setback requirements.
Thank you, Anay, for the answers, and thank you, Councillor Dudas, for bringing this forward. I do think long overdue conversation, I'd say, but I hope that when it comes back, we're able to find synergies between, what I'll call a successful program and Trees and Trust and this initiative, so that they work in communities where we're finding either a loss of trees through the various climate impacts or the development impacts that we've seen. So thank you for bringing this forward. I'll be following it on the sidelines because I do think it's part of our future diligence here. So thanks.
Great, Councillor Brockington.
Thanks, Mayor, and good morning to you and colleagues. By the time this report gets to us, it will be over a year since the derecho hit, and I'm very concerned about not planting trees as soon as possible. I do acknowledge that the motion talks about private property, which is obviously different than the right-of-way or curbside land and other public lands or property that the city offers. But I know that many residents don't know, and I'm switching gears here a bit slightly on right-of-way land, that the onus is on the resident if they've lost their tree to contact the city to ask for a replacement, that there is not an automatic replacement of trees that have come down. And residents just expect, well, my tree has come down, therefore the city will replant it. They don't know that the onus is on them to contact the city and register or apply for a new tree. So with some, just if I could ask staff, how are we proactively enumerating the trees that we've lost? And how are we making residents and even business owners aware that if city trees have come down on ROA lands, basically on their property, that they need to call in and register or apply for new trees? How are we doing that?
So, Mr. Mayor, a couple points to address the councilor's questions. The first one is we still have the Trees and Trust program that's still active, which is already fully committed. So we are still planting trees under that program. In terms of notification with homeowners that have lost their trees, to the extent possible, when we are either giving them notification on uprooted trees or when we're going to be coming back to grind their trees, we use that opportunity to be able to remind them that if they want a tree replacement, to apply for it, to make sure that one is that they still want a tree, and also to ensure that we can coordinate the type of tree that they're going to be looking for, because it's not always the same replacement that they're looking for. Plus, in terms of media outreach, we will continue to have that message out there so that residents also have different channels to be made aware of. The reason why we haven't just leveraged the notification to the resident is just because of the sheer volume of trees that we've been dealing with. So we didn't want residents to assume that we knew of all of them, that it was automatic. So that's why we're trying to put multiple barriers or communication channels for them to be able to communicate with us.
So how many trees does the Trees in Trust program normally facilitate in any given year? And how will staff adjust its budget and resources in 2023 and going forward to make up for what we've lost because of the May 2022 storm?
Yeah, Mayor, I don't have that number off the top of my head. I could certainly follow up with that number. As part of our planning for 2023, we know that there's been a significant loss and there's going to be a lot of pressures. So we will be looking at opportunities in terms of how do we supplement tree planting capacity.
Okay, so I like this motion. It talks about private property, and I do think we have a role to play to help facilitate planting of trees on private property. But I'm still very concerned that the average Joe or public does not know that if they lose a tree on the city's right-of-way property on their front yard, that the onus is on them to request a new tree. And I do think there needs to be some consideration given to public awareness campaign this fall to get people to call in and get it registered and on a list, because I need these trees, we need these trees replanted as soon as possible. And it's an ongoing discussion I have in my community, because people just assume that they've lost a tree, it will be replanted. And that's not the case. So I'd like staff to take note of that, and whatever we can do, particularly this autumn, to make people aware and encourage them to call in and make that request would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hubley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Like many of the councillors around the table, my ward was hit very hard by the storm. In one woodlot alone, known as the Hazeldine Woods, we lost over 1,000 trees in that area. And the repair or I guess repair is the best word to use for it. The operation to come in after to clean that up and to get it ready for renewal was massive, and it was referred to as almost like a clear-cut operation because of how much trees were lost. So I support this motion. I thank the councillor for acknowledging that there's going to be a big demand on private property trees as well. I just want assurances from staff that the public property trees are not going to lose the priority, because we need to get into these areas and do the replanting as early as possible next year. So can I get some assurance from you that that will remain a high priority to get in there and get that done next year?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, absolutely. There's a number of city areas, green spaces, parkland, that have been significantly impacted by loss of trees, and that will remain a priority in terms of replanting. Right now, the focus has been on the removal of trees. Next year, the focus is going to be on the replanting of trees.
Thank you. And my other question is, the one part of this motion talks about reporting back in Q2. I have a feeling, I think many of my colleagues would agree, this is going to be a big hit on your budgets, that you're going to need some more money in your budget next year to do the public and the private planting operations. So Q2 worries me that if you're going to wait to add up the numbers for Q2, that you'll miss the opportunity to get money in 2023. Is there a way that staff could work on that and have that report back early in the term of the new council so that they can prioritize that in the budget discussions?
Mr. Mayor, at this point, I don't think that we can really commit to a sooner development for that. But what we could look at is, when we bring the report forward, is look at that point in terms of funding opportunities for the program, because then we'll have a better sense in terms of quantum that we may be dealing with. There's also certain times of the year that we can do the planting. It's not something that's done year round. So it will be a part year impact, and we can look at those opportunities also at that point to try to maximize the amount of plantings that will be done. We have already initiated discussions with Tree Canada as an example to see, okay, how would we set up this type of program? Because one of the big concern that we have is we want to minimize the administrative and the logistic process to be able to get as many trees as possible planted. And that's going to take us a bit of time to be able to work through that process.
Okay, I appreciate that. And I'm sure you're going to do a good job on behalf of the city on that. My concern is to make sure that you have the money for this. So if you don't think you can quantify this before your budget discussions, I wonder, maybe the question for the city manager would be, can we put some money aside in the budget that you would be able to tap into once you can quantify what's needed? Or maybe I see the city manager's not here. Alain, if you know the answer to that, sorry, I thought he was there.
Yeah, no, Mr. Mayor, the piece that there's been a lot of expenses that have been incurred on this cleanup that weren't really planned. We've already started forecasting basically the additional costs that we're going to be looking at into 2023. So those are items that we're already working with finance in terms of identifying for 2023. So I don't think there's a lost opportunity. It's just at this point we haven't quantified all of it. But I think there is opportunities when we bring the report forward to also indicate how we're going to be able to implement.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for your answers, Alain.
All right, thank you, Councillor. Anyone else wish to speak before Councillor Dudas wraps up this item? Oh, Councillor Dudas, to wrap up, please.
Yes, no, I want to thank all my colleagues for their comments. And I think we all know that this is going to take many, many years to recover. We may not fully recover the trees, the old trees that we lost during this. And this doesn't even scratch the surface of what some of our other communities, some of our rural communities are even going through to recover from this storm. But I do know that many of my residents have reached out and said, what can we do to recover the trees, to get back from this? I wanted to thank staff They worked closely with me on this report. Their timelines align with their planting season. Their timelines align with their ability to deliver on recommendations that would bring forward not only a budgetary recommendation, but also the ability to actually deliver on tree requests. So I wanted to thank them for that. I wanted to also thank them for the immense amount of work they have been doing to not only come out and remove all the debris, but to grind the stumps and to get there. And I look forward to working closely with our community groups and to all of council to get the word out that Trees and Trust is available, other tree programs are available, and to start to replace our tree canopies. So I thank everyone in advance for their support on this. And I do look forward to taking every opportunity to get past what it's been dealt with in terms of Mother Nature, in terms of the storm. Thank you.
Thank you very much. On the motion as presented, carried, adopté.
Carried.
Motions requiring suspension of the rules of procedure. Motion by Councillor Kavanaugh, seconded by myself with respect to Strong Mayors Building Homes Act on suspension. Carried. Councillor Kavanaugh.
Just to clarify, there was some small changes by the clerk's office.
Yes,
So as long
yeah,
as
there's
that's noted.
the last paragraph, the word provincial has been added to government and City of Ottawa.
Yes.
Okay,
Thank you.
floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for seconding it. I think we're all concerned about the concept of a strong mayor model. Constituents rely on their elected officials to bring their voice to the table. This model implies that the concerns from councillors and their residents on such things as development in their communities will not hold weight. The legislation was introduced into the legislature without consultation and during a municipal election. The minister, Stephen Clark, has stated that this is about getting more housing built, but what is the cost? The City of Ottawa put together an official plan that took much effort and consultation, showing their commitment to housing, and it was supported by the majority of council. The provincial government has yet to give its feedback and approval on the official plan so that our city may move forward on the hard work that was put into this extensive plan for the future of our city. Ottawa City Council has already agreed upon an ambitious new official plan that sees 60% of our growth as a city within the urban areas. The overriding theme needs to be the environmental impact on what we do as a city. Building more housing in the outskirts of the city will mean more roads and other infrastructure that needs to be built, and further loss of green space and dependency on cars. We just had a bunch of hot, humid days this past month and experiencing more extreme weather situations. We need to remind ourselves of the importance of planning to reduce the impact of climate change, including having enough green space and tree canopy. I don't believe this strong mayor model will be focusing on climate change, and that consultation with communities remains the priority to maintain and build livable communities. The model for stronger mayors would essentially take the voice away of residents, at the very least lessen it. I've always been a strong advocate and supporter of affordable housing, and I believe that we can accomplish much more with equal representation around the council table. There needs to be consultation before this moves forward any further with people whose voices we represent, our constituents. The potential to transform municipal government system into one that has fewer checks and balances and the potential for abuse is evident. One of the concerning aspects of this bill is that the provincial priorities will be spelled out later in the Act's regulations. We should know the precise language of these priorities before passing a new law that gives the mayor power to uphold them. So I'll read the motion. That the rules of procedure be suspended to consider the following motion. Whereas August 10th, the Government of Ontario introduced Bill 3, the Strong Mayors Building Homes Act 2022. And whereas this legislation, if passed, would give mayors of the City of Toronto and the City of Ottawa additional powers beyond those currently or in the City of Toronto Act and the Municipal Act 2001, including the power to veto certain significant council decisions unless 2/3 of the council overrides the veto. Whereas the rationale given for this legislation was to fast track housing projects which has not been discussed during the provincial election. Whereas the Ottawa City Council has worked closely with residents on many development projects over the years, and many projects have been successfully modified and improved based on local input. Therefore, be it resolved that the Council requests that the Mayor write to the Premier of Ontario to request that the provincial government consult the City of Ottawa, the public, as well as the professional and municipal organizations on the detailed regulations in advance of passing Bill 3, the Strong Mayors Building Homes Act 2022.
Great. Thank you very much, Councillor Brockington, on the Councillor Kavanaugh motion.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and thank you to my colleague, Councillor Kavanaugh, and yourself for moving this motion. I've been opposed to the planned legislation since it was first introduced. And the question I keep asking is, what is the problem that exists that we're trying to fix, or that the province is trying to fix? And Mayor, I believe I've heard correctly, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that this is not a power that you as Mayor of Ottawa Council have requested, and certainly no pre-consultation with the City of Ottawa before the provincial government made this announcement. We are, as a council, democratically elected by the people to make decisions, and we democratically make decisions in this forum. And yes, we have healthy, passionate debate, but my observation over this term is a business of this city continues to be done, and development and housing applications continue to be addressed and approved, and housing continues to move forward. The AMO board has debated this matter, and the number one request that AMO has made of the province is, as what Councillor Kavanaugh just stated, is consultation. There needs to be full-scale consultation across this province with not just councils, but other stakeholders about the proposed legislation. The Premier at AMO already announced that he plans to expand these powers to other municipalities before any type of measurement or assessment of the Ottawa and Toronto experience before you decide to go forward. So they are full steam ahead with these powers. And at the end of the day, I still struggle to see or link with all of the new powers that this legislation would provide mayors and how it actually builds affordable housing. If the mayor can sign off and hire a new transit general manager, how many new houses will that build? And I've said this at AMO as well. If you go down every specific new power authority that the mayor can veto or have the ultimate decision-making authority over, how does that translate to new housing? Because the province continues to say this is about housing. So if there's no problem in Ottawa in this regard, what is the problem that we're trying to fix? So I appreciate my colleague moving this motion. I would just suggest, Mayor, and I don't know if this requires an amendment, but I would like the letter to be copied to AMO as well. AMO has appeared before the standing committee this week and are taking a position on this matter. And unlike Toronto, Ottawa is a member of AMO, Toronto is not. And so they've been speaking up basically on our behalf this week. So if that letter could be copied to AMO, that would be appreciated. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe we'll just take note of that to send it to AMO as well as the Ontario Big City Mayors Coalition as well. Anyone else on the motion? I'll just offer a couple of comments. I agree with obviously the motion. I'm happy to second it. Thank you, Councillor Kavanaugh, for approaching my office. Thank you, Councillor Brockington. I know you've worked on this file on our behalf as our AMO representative at the board of directors. This came out of the blue, folks. I didn't know anything about it. It affected two people, John Tory and Jim Watson, and neither of us were given a heads up, and it affected our positions. Obviously, there'll be a new mayor in Ottawa, and I'm not going to predict what's going to happen in Toronto. It looks like John's doing very well there. But the fact of the matter is, this is something that no one has ever asked for that I'm aware of at the City of Ottawa. I also find it a little strange trying to connect affordable housing with more powers for the mayor. I'm not sure where that idea came from. But at the end of the day, there's been a complete lack of consultation. And I think it's insulting to the women and men who put their names forward to sit as a councillor. You don't want to simply be here as rubber stamps. You want to be here to represent your community. And I've found that over the last 12 years, when a member of council has an issue that's very important to them in their wards, they know I have an open door. They come and see how can we work together to get something done. There are other cases where we're obviously diametrically opposed to a particular issue, and there won't be any middle ground. But the fact of the matter is, I think giving too much power to one person, namely the mayor, is a dangerous precedent for our democracy. And I would urge members of council to support this motion, to send a very clear signal to the province that at the very least we need some kind of public consultation by community groups, by professional associations. This issue came up. We thought we were going to have a discussion with Minister Clark, but he canceled his meeting at AMO at the last minute, unfortunately. So we still try to get in touch with him to let him know, as a former mayor himself, that if you're an effective mayor, you don't need all of these extra powers, quite frankly. And I think the benefit that I derive from members of council is that you know your communities better than anyone. You know when that stop sign went up, when the zoning issue is coming forward on that neighborhood, when site plan control is coming, why the community center lock agreement was not lived up to, and so on. You know the grassroots better than anyone in the community, and I rely on that perspective certainly when you have issues that you want to come and speak to me about. So thank you, Councillor Kavanaugh, for the motion. I know we have another similar motion by Councillor Menard. We'll debate that in a moment. So all in favor of the motion by Kavanaugh-Watson? Carried? Adopté?
Carried.
Merci. Et peut-être je vais dire seulement quelques mots en français pour dire.
I'd like to say a few words in French now. It's not a priority for me. It's not a priority for the city of Ottawa either. I'd like to thank Councillor Kavanaugh for her motion today. It's not a good idea to put too much power in the hands of one single person, because we have a non-partisan system here in Ottawa and in other municipalities across the province. And I think it's important to make sure that all council members have input into decisions for their own residents and their own wards.
Yes, thanks very much, Mayor, and Councillor Kavanaugh's motion. Certainly important to ask for the regulations to be released and for them to be broadly consulted on. This motion by Councillor, myself and Councillor Deans asks that you write a letter similar to your comments in the public opposing this new legislation. So I'll read it out and appreciate support on it. Whereas on August 10th, 2022, the province of Ontario introduced Bill 3, the Strong Mayors Building Homes Act 2022. And whereas if passed, the legislation would give the mayors of the City of Toronto and the City of Ottawa additional powers beyond those currently provided for in the City of Toronto Act and the Municipal Act 2001, including giving each city's mayor a veto power over certain council decisions related to provincial priorities, with a 2/3 majority of council being required to override the mayor's veto power. And whereas Bill 3 would also further centralize power in the mayor's office by granting the mayor additional powers as it relates to proposing a budget for council's consideration and the authority to appoint or terminate the chief administrative officer / city manager, as well as other senior city staff. And whereas this legislation was introduced into the legislature without consultation and during a municipal election, and whereas the province claims these powers will allow more homes to be built, and whereas no evidence has been provided to support this claim, and whereas recent history demonstrates that the mayor of Ottawa has been able to consistently secure majority support for his motions at the council table, whether we all love that or not, whereas the head of council, meaning the mayor, is already the most influential position at the council table, and whereas further empowering the mayor at the expense of ward councillors undermines the ability of ward councillors to effectively represent their constituencies at the council table, and whereas this increased asymmetry of power at the council table diminishes the value of local representation and local democracy, and whereas both Ottawa's outgoing mayor and some mayoral candidates have already publicly criticized this legislation, therefore be it resolved that Ottawa City Council opposes Bill 3, the Strong Mayors Building Homes Act 2022, and asks that the Government of Ontario reconsider this legislation, and be it further resolved that the mayor be directed to write a letter communicating council's opposition to Bill 3 to the Premier of Ontario and to the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, and of course, AMO would be good to copy there too. So appreciate the time, Mayor, and support on this.
Great. Anyone on the motion? Carried. Adopté.
Carried.
The next motion requiring suspension of the rules of procedure is by Councillor Gower, seconded by Councillor Moffat with respect to pool enclosure update. On suspension, carried. Councillor Gower.
Thank you. Yeah, essentially this is a technical amendment. Council approved a report back in June, and the accompanying bylaw is in front of council today. Staff have identified a number of errors and inconsistencies in the documents and the wording. So this is to correct that. Whereas council carried the report titled Pool Enclosure Update on June 22nd, 2022. And whereas the report recommends updating the City of Ottawa's pool enclosure bylaw number 2013-39. And whereas errors and inconsistencies were identified in documents 1 and 2, summary of proposed changes to the pool enclosure bylaw, therefore be it resolved that the rules of procedure be suspended to permit the introduction of the following motion, and therefore be it further resolved that documents 1 and 2 of the report be amended. And there's 10 different items that are captured in the motion, which in the interest of time, I will not read, but they'll scroll on the screen. And therefore be it further resolved that there be no further notice pursuant to section 3417 of the Planning Act.
Okay, so this is a series of technical amendments on the motion carried. Adopté. The next motion requiring suspension of the rules of procedures by Councillor Brockington, seconded by Councillor McKenney, with respect to advocacy on social assistance and ODSP rates on suspension, carried. Councillor Brockington, please.
Thank you, Mayor, for that. And first, I'd like to thank my colleague, Councillor McKenney, for their support on this motion. Very, very important. Most recent provincial election earlier this year, this was an issue that all parties discussed through one form or another. And we've heard from multiple social service providers and agencies, not just in Ottawa, but across Ontario, about the completely inadequate levels of support that both ODSP and social assistance provides beneficiaries of those programs. This is a very lengthy motion. I'm not going to read it. In essence, the provincial government has committed to reviewing these payments. They still fall quite short of what needs to happen. And in particular, I'd just like to read a few clauses to hammer home the giant chasm between really what is needed for either a single person or a family in this province and what in reality they're actually receiving. So a family of 4 or a couple with 2 dependents under 18 currently on ODSP receives $22,644 a year or $1,887 a month. Single person on ODSP receives $14,028 a year or $1,169 a month. A family of 4 on Ontario Works receives $15,000 a year or $1,250 a month, or a single person on Ontario Works receives about $8,800 a year or $733 a month. How could you live on those sums if you were to take your family or yourself singly and survive when you need to have rent covered, when you need to have food purchased, when you need basic needs, transit, and others? The fact is, it's not possible. And these rates needed to be augmented years ago. And the levels that our current provincial government are considering are still grossly inadequate to the realities that residents are faced. And in fact, it keeps people living in poverty. There's absolutely no way that their basic needs can be met from a month-to-month basis. This motion asks that Ottawa City Council direct Mayor Watson to write on its behalf to the Premier of Ontario, the Minister of Children, Community and Social Services, and the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing to advocate for an immediate increase to ODSP rates and Ontario work rates for basic needs and shelter, so that the rates are commensurate with what they would have been if they were linked to the Consumer Price Index back in 2018. So yes, some changes are coming, but it's grossly still inadequate. 230 social service providers and community organizations called on the Premier to double social service rates ahead of the 2022 budget. and I believe they're going to get 5%. So we have a lot of work to do. This is a very serious issue for hundreds of thousands of people across our province, including in Ottawa, and it's something this council needs to make a statement on. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor McKenney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I want to thank Councillor Brockington for moving this motion. You know, there was a time in this province where actually homelessness didn't exist. We did not see people. We did not have large shelters. People were able to have low-paying work and still afford rent. And the benefits that were paid to people who were unable to work for a number of reasons were adequate. They were adequate to keep them housed, were adequate to keep them and their families, their kids, adequately fed and clothed. And that wasn't very long ago. It was in my lifetime. You know, there was a time that I actually was on what was at the time called mother's allowance, and you could survive. You could get by. You could go back to school, which I did. You could, you know, have an apartment. You could live very modestly, and you know, but you could get by. There was childcare that was available at the time. There was transit that at the time. I remember living in Ottawa and not worrying about, you know, how I would get around by transit because it worked, and it was also affordable. I don't remember a time when I couldn't afford a transit pass. And this was all while I was going back to school and on, what is today, OW. So we can get back there without these types of basic supports. Once people fall into that type of poverty, or if that's the poverty that they live in today, there really is no way of getting out. For myself, it took at least a decade, maybe more, before I was, you know, one paycheck away from being back, into what would have been homelessness, because 10, 15 years on, there just wasn't that safety net, and it's not there today for people. So I do want to thank my colleague and all of you for supporting this motion. It's really important that cities demand better from their province. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Any other comments? Carried, adopté. Next motion is by Councillor El-Shantiri, seconded by Councillor Moffat. The Ditch Alteration and Maintenance Sponsors Group. How do I get on that? Councillor El-Shantiri.
You have to convince 15 other colleagues to let you in. So thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, colleague, for waiving the rule procedures or suspend the rule procedure. So whereas at the meeting of July 6, 2022, Council approved the Ditch Alteration Policy Update Report AC 2022, and whereas Council approved motion 80/6 to establish a ditch alteration and maintenance sponsor group to act as a sounding board and to work with staff to oversee the implementation of ditch alteration policy, including a public consultation and education plan, and where the sponsor group is to be comprised of the chairs of the Transportation Committee, Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee, and the Standing Committee on Environmental Protection, Water and Waste Management, and up to 3 members of council at large, and where the office of the clerk has undertaken a circulation of expression of interest, and 3-member council has expressed an interest in serving as member at large on this sponsor group. Therefore, be it resolved that council appoint Councillor Teresa Kavanagh, and once I read your name, you can't change your mind anymore. Councillor Teresa Kavanagh, Riley Brockington, and Catherine Kitts to the Ditch Alteration and Maintenance Sponsor Group.
So on suspension on this motion, carried. On the motion that's presented, adopté, carried.
Carried.
Thank you. Thank you to those members. Next is Councillor Kitts, seconded by Councillor Moffat, the extension of antenna concurrence for 2375 Frank Kenny Road.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is highly administrative, just regarding a new antenna system in Cumberland Ward. So I'll skip ahead. I don't think anyone wants me to read this entire thing, but whereas the 3-year period has expired and city's process does not allow staff delegated authority to extend municipal concurrence, and whereas the 2019 application for 2375 Frank Kenny Road remains unchanged, and whereas the proposed antenna is an opportunity to improve service for the hundreds of cell users in the area. Therefore, be it resolved that the municipal concurrence for the proposed antenna system at 2375 Frank Kenny Road be extended by 24 months, lapsing on the 17th of July, 2024.
Carried.
Carried. Adopté. Any other motions requiring suspension of the rules of procedure? Notice the motion for consideration of subsequent meeting. Avis de motion par examen à réunion subséquente. Councillor Cloutier, please, seconded by myself.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just going to introduce the motion and we could talk about it next weekend. It's with respect to a donation of an ambulance, a decommissioned ambulance to St. John's Ambulance. Would you like me to read the whereases, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, I think this is one that there's probably support to waive the rules and deal with now because it's St. John Ambulance and it's the next available. So agreed to suspend the rules on this? Agreed. So maybe you should read them out.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Then I will introduce it since we're going to deal with it today. Whereas the St. John Ambulance, L'Ambulance Saint Jean supports events and festivals in the city of Ottawa by supporting Ottawa paramedic services, including but not limited to opioid harm reduction. And whereas St. John Ambulance is seeking the donation of a surplus ambulance to provide training to employees and volunteers and to replace the one currently in use for service the public in sports, arts, cultural festivals, and major events. Whereas the city of Ottawa has approximately 85 to 90 ambulances in its fleet at any given period, and the expected life cycle of an ambulance is estimated to be 54 months and or between 200 and 230,000 kilometers. Whereas the city of Ottawa usually disposes of roughly 10 to 12 ambulances per year, and the next replacement cycle for ambulances in Ottawa is scheduled for June 2023 with 31 new ambulances on order. And whereas the residual value of a used ambulance averages between $20,000 and $23,000, whereas Section 41(4) of the city's procurement bylaw, which is 2000-50 as amended, states that the sale of surplus furniture, vehicles, equipment, stock, supplies, and other goods and materials shall be made to the highest responsive bidder, and the sale shall be made in accordance with the provisions of this bylaw where applicable. And whereas Ottawa City Council has previously waived this provision in order to donate the surplus ambulances to specific causes or organizations, for example, the Salvation Army Community and Emergency Response Team, and organizations doing work in Ghana and Ethiopia. Therefore, be it resolved that staff report back to council when the next ambulance is ready for disposal, and be it further resolved that at the time of the report, council consider waiving subsection 41(4) of bylaw 2000-50 as amended, and consider the donation of one ambulance to St. John Ambulance with the lost residual value to be funded from fleet reserves.
Okay, great idea, Councillor. Thank you. All in favor? Carried. Adopté. Merci. Next is Councillor Leeper, seconded by Councillor McKenney. Right to Food Day. Councillor Leeper, if you'd like to introduce it, please.
Thank you. Next council meeting, I'll be asking council to vote in favor of a motion to designate Wednesday, October 5th, 2022, Right to Food Day in recognition of the work that Parkdale Food Centre and other partners have done to increase food security for low-income residents across Ottawa. And I know since Parkdale asked me to do this, that the issue has become higher profile in the city. So thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Next is Councillor.
Roger's recently changed shots. So I'm just going to confirm we're good to go. And I might ask, I believe I'm getting the thumbs up from the booth that we are. If I could just ask you to confirm for the record the passage of Councillor Brockington, or that we've introduced Councillor Brockington's motion, because I think the last part of that was cut off. We are now, I can confirm we are live with sound on the YouTube channel. And the last, if Councillor Brockington could just read into the record, therefore be it resolved of his last motion to ensure that is captured on the live stream. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for your patience.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Clerk. So yes, colleagues, this is a notice of motion. Whereas residents of Trent Street have requested that parking on the north side of the street be removed, whereas the lack of sidewalks, high snowbanks in the winter, a budding school, Turnbull, and Trent being a main street leading to Fisher Avenue, shuttles a fair number of pedestrians during the day, placing them on the road. Whereas a bulletin was circulated by the local ward councillor to every household in June 2022 as part of a survey on speed bump placement, which also asked residents for their support in removing the north side parking. And whereas there was no opposition to removing on-street parking on the north side of Trent Street, therefore be it resolved that council designate the north side of Trent Street as no parking. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next is Councillor Fleury and Tierney. It's a long series of whereas, Councillor, and it's a notice of motion. So maybe just go to the be it resolved.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, this would have been brought to the next Transportation Committee but as there's none left, this would be a councillor's report. So if you want to scroll down to the therefore be it resolved. So therefore be it resolved that council approve the installation of always stop control at the intersection of A, Saint-Charles and Alice, B, Laval and Loyer, C, Saint-Monique and Marquette, D, Saint-Monique and Saint-Cécile, and E, Daly Street and Cumberland Street. Be it further resolved that council waive the warrant criteria to include the intersection of Saint-Ambroise and Alice on the list of intersections eligible for PXO, subject to availability of future funding in the next road safety action plan, safety review, and in consultation with the 2022 ward councillor. And be it further resolved that council approve the implementation of a no right on red prohibition at the intersection of York and Sussex Drive.
Okay, next is Councillor Menard on private approaches on Grove and Grosvenor.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Streets you're familiar with, I'm sure. I won't go through the whole thing, but I will just read the therefore be it resolved. It's just a standard private encroachment motion we've seen. That council approved that in respect of the reconstruction of Grove Avenue and Grosvenor Avenue, private approaches and encroachments being reinstated as they were immediately prior to the reconstruction of this street, and be it further resolved that the fees for an encroachment, including the agreement in respect of 93 Grosvenor, be waived, subject to the owner agreeing to remove the encroachment should redevelopment take place on site.
Okay, thank you. Any other motions for some consideration of subsequent meeting? Notice of intent, avis d'intention, notice of intent from the Ottawa Community Lands Development Corporation. They will submit their annual report for consideration at the City Council meeting of September 21st, 2022. Item 22, motion to introduce bylaws. Councillor Curry, please.
That the bylaws listed on the agenda under motion to introduce bylaws, 3 readings, be read and passed.
Carried. Confirmation bylaw, règlement de ratification. Councillor Curry, please.
That the proceedings of the City Council meeting of August 31st, 2022 be adjourned. No?
So yeah, the confirmation bylaw.
Oh.
Mr. Mayor, we may have neglected to provide that copy, but it's the bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the City Council meeting of August 31st, 2022.
Carried.
Carried.
We have no written inquiries, Madam. Councillor Curry, adjournment, please.
the proceedings of the City Council meeting of August 31st, 2022 be adjourned.
Carried. And the media availability will begin in 10 minutes. On va commencer la conférence de presse dans 10 minutes. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.